the video.
All right, we're good to go.
Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order on this Monday, October 14th, slightly after 4 p.m. Can someone assure me that we're in full attendance? I don't, the video is a little small to recognize faces.
Yeah.
Yep.
Ted and I
Okay, the whole committee is here.
Yep.
Someone to approve the agenda, please.
So moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, public comments. I wasn't aware of any. Are there?
There are no public comments.
All right, then I guess we'd like to move to student academic progress and supports. Tim and Amy?
Thank you, Mark. So what we have for you is, and if anybody here wants the printout, we have a printout of the slide deck. I don't know if that looks like Ted's got his. You want one, Judy?
Are you gonna put it up there?
We are.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's fine then. I
Okay.
printed it at home, but I've looked at it.
So we have a little slide deck, and then we've been joined by some of our interventionists to kind of share some detail on what kind of supports we actually provide for our kids. So
Please introduce themselves for the record.
Sure. I'm Pam Smith. I'm Reading Interventionist at Heritage.
I'm Jamie Radke. I was for 3 years part-time part-time math interventionist at Prairie. And now this will be my second year full-time interventionist at Heritage.
I am a random person in the school district.
well, that's
So I'm wondering, I saw the beginning and it says K to 6. So all the curriculum discussion is going to be focused on those grades.
just the first slide. We're going to cover all of our grades.
Okay.
And
Right.
we just came out of the public comment, but if you have any public comments you wish to share before the meeting, I think we could be flexible in that.
I know nothing about this committee. My only comment as a new person with high schoolers is that the offerings are limited relative to other schools.
Or for academic supports or the curriculum overall.
Curriculum overall.
Okay, very good. Yes, name to the record.
What's that name for the record? Tracy T-R-A-C-Y Tripkovich.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've got a mix of an overview on our support programs plus our start of your data. And the first part is K6, so Amy's going to launch us.
Yeah, so the first slide is just kind of an overview for how we kind of talk about our universal curriculum and then additional supports for students. So these are phrases that you'll hear teachers talk about quite a bit. So when we say tier 1, we're talking about the universal instruction. Sometimes you might see this as a pyramid model, and so that's kind of the base of the pyramid. That's the instruction that all students get. That's our core curriculum. We do differentiated as needed, but that's what all students get. And then if you kind of go up on the pyramid, that next level would be tier 2, and that would be providing some additional instruction for like a strategic area of need that a child might have. And then as you go up the ladder, the pyramid, the top would be tier 3. That's the smallest group of students. Those are those who really need a little bit more intensive intervention to start to meet grade level goals. And so those interventions are delivered by a specialist, and that's why we have our 2 specialists here with us today. So that's just kind of an overview about how we talk about kind of our school day and our curriculum. Here you can see it visually on the next slide. So that green is that universal curriculum. That's what all students receive. And then 3 times a year, we do a universal benchmark assessment. So that's a test that we would give all the students to kind of screen them to see where they are. After we get those results, then we would identify students who would need maybe just a little selective intervention that maybe the classroom teacher could provide, or those that might need a more intensive intervention. As a result of intensive interventions, if those are not successful, we might determine that the child should be evaluated for a learning disability. That's that kind of pink section on that graph there. So if we go down to the next slide, STAR is the assessment that I presented to the board a couple of times last year. That is a computer-based assessment. It's adaptive, so as students get answers right, the problems become more difficult. If students get answers wrong, the problems become a little easier so that they kind of see just where the child is performing. And so it's a pretty brief assessment. A lot of kids spend 10, maybe 20 minutes most on the assessment. So it really is just like a quick screener that we give all students. So here is the last 5 years of data for math. We typically give math first through sixth. We did not give math in first grade last year because of the remote administration challenges with first graders. But otherwise we have 5 years of data. So I will give you just a chance to look at that. We have 2017 at the top and going to the most recent year, and then the grades across the top.
On these, like with all of them, is there the 45th percentile? Why is that percentile chosen in terms of
Yeah, do you
the
want to speak to that a
percentages
little
or
bit,
any?
Yeah, great question. So, so the percentile rank for folks following at home is if you took a student and their score and you compared them to the entire nation, what percent of students in the national pool have a lower score? And so as we look at our students and as a quick benchmark for do they need academic support of along the lines of the graphic and the previous slide Amy was referring to, our lowest tier of students we would call urgent intervention. And these would be students scoring up to the 25th percentile. Now in our district, that's less than a quarter of the kids by quite a lot, but nationally that would be your lowest 25%. Then we have the next tier, which is our intervention tier, which is 30 up to the 35th percentile. Again, below the national average, not as urgent as that first tier. And then we have an at-risk or on-watch tier that goes up to the 45th percentile. And so students scoring above the 45th percentile are not in the watch tier, they're above the watch tier. Now, of course, over the course of the year, it could be like this, but that's the significance of the 45th percentile.
So then if you look, scroll, Rebecca, we also have this data for reading. We assess second through sixth graders traditionally on the STAR reading. For younger grades, we would use a reading readiness assessment. In the past, that was PALS, but this year we've switched to the STAR early literacy data. So we don't have the second grade reading STAR. But here you can take a look at those scores over time and across the grades.
So with both of these, you see any certain, obviously you're seeing lower.
Yeah, I mean,
for
I included the
several
5
reasons.
years just so you can see, you know, in a typical year, we have fluctuations, you know, even from like, you know, 2017 to 2019, there's some fluctuations, and that was not during the pandemic. But definitely you can see many of the grades, not all, but many are a little lower, obviously, coming off of the pandemic year. But some of them are actually pretty comparable to previous years. It kind of just depends on the cohort of students.
Amy and Tim, this is helpful information, but some in the public might misinterpret it, saying that, oh, we're averaging 72% in second grade in 2020, but it's really 72% making the 45th percentile. Do we have the average percentile for each year that our schools have attained, so that this is a combination K6, a segregated chart that would show what the total average percentile is in Waunakee per grade? Or could that be gotten for future reports?
Definitely. I mean, we have all sorts of ways that we can run the reports, not only from STAR, but then we also use our own data analysis tool, EduClimber. So I can certainly report it in any number of ways.
How's the committee feel about that? Would that be worthwhile info, or is it just my crazy idea?
That's partly why I asked why the 40, what the significance of the 45th percentile was, but yeah, I'm not sure.
Will you have other tests that you show? Are there more tests out there? So I don't want to overload everybody with numbers. So if you've got
Right.
another
Yeah.
another indication of how kids are doing in reading and math.
Yes, I mean, we have lots of classroom-based assessments. We have other, common formative assessments. This is one that most grades administer, so that's why I selected the STAR. I mean, our schools look at all sorts of data when they have their universal data meetings, but the STAR is all that I brought to you today. And again, as Mark asked, I mean, that would be very easy for us to gather additional ways to look at the STAR. That would not be a problem.
What would that score look like? What are we saying are?
Well, to me, it would say this is the actual percentile we're at. This doesn't tell us what percentile we're at. It tells us that we've met the 45th. But it's possible that with the number of people over the 45th, regardless of people under it, we might end up as a school district at the 55th percentile. And this doesn't tell us that. So in some ways, we see how we're doing against the national average in attainment of it, but it doesn't tell really as a school what is our actual percentile in reading.
So Mark, are you interested in seeing either by grade or an aggregate what our median percentile rank is for each school? So is the middle student in second grade at the 5th percentile, 60th percentile nationally? Is that what you're interested
Yeah,
in?
what I guess I'm proposing is that this is a K6 score, and instead of doing how many are meeting the average, what is our actual percentile on the in terms of reading scores or math scores? So are we 70% at 45, but our total average might be 54 when we just average what the actual scores average out as. So that would tell us we're above the average, but this is where we're at. Whereas to me, this one kind of shows a higher achievement that's not necessarily so. That one would show the actual local achievement level.
But is this showing where we need the intervention? If we're low, then that's what the data is showing. We need more intervention, not that how high everybody got, but how are we helping those that didn't get that high?
That's probably the lens that I was looking through when I was creating the chart, Mark, is because I was thinking about, with the interventionist coming in, like how
Right.
Who needs intervention. So I guess that was the lens I was looking through, but I would be happy to compile with like a median score per grade.
Well, and I wouldn't suggest we don't include this. I just was
Yep.
suggesting we add 2 extra tables, one for reading, one for math, that would show the actual percentile for Waunakee, so the parents actually have a kind of a sense of what that looks like. And I would argue that if Waunakee has an average of let's just say 55, that would hint also to the need for intervention. And, you know, per grade. So if it's 55 in second grade and 58 in third grade, whatever. If it's too much work, or if a different score will show that, that would satisfy my thoughts.
Yep, definitely, that would be no problem, Mark.
Okay,
I guess in either case, it's showing the trend. This is kind of giving that. You know, I guess both would be helpful. I guess you look at the other one and you could use it more against other schools or other districts, probably more uniformly, if that's something that you
This
want to
is,
do.
I mean, lots of districts use STAR, but this is kind of just for our own local purpose that we
Right.
administer it. It's not part of the state assessment.
Yeah, so you gotta know, you look compare it against anyone anyway. So. Actually, go either way.
Yeah. So then using this screening data, just to kind of review again. So we provide that tier 1 instruction. And then at our elementary schools, we have an intervention or enrichment block. Sometimes we call it time E. Sometimes schools might call it win time, what I need time. So this is like a 30-minute block, or at the intermediate, it's one of their blocks, where students who need additional intervention work with our specialists, students who need enrichment might work with pathways or with a class of teachers. So this is a little block of time where we aren't teaching a new instruction. We are providing that practice or remediation or acceleration as needed. And so we kind of differentiate those based on who is delivering the intervention. So tier 2 is the students who are closer to grade level, and then tier 3 would be those intensive interventions, and those would be delivered by people like Pam and Jean. So I believe that's the end of the K6 piece. Did you have any? Oh, no, then it's to introduce our staffing. Thank you. So this is just a quick slide to show our staffing levels for interventionists at each building. We are very fortunate to have at least 1.0 for reading and math at all of the buildings. We were able to add this year 1.5 math positions. We added 1 at intermediate and 0.5 at Heritage, and then we added an additional reading at Heritage. And that puts us more in line just in terms of student numbers and enrollment. So those 3 larger schools are staffed more equitably now. So that was something that the board acted on last year. So thank you for that. So then I would just open it up for questions, or if you had any questions for Jamie or Pam, they would be happy to answer those as well.
Do you work in small groups or one-on-one?
Both. It kind of depends on the situation. Sometimes if you have a student that is, if you look at the pool of kids that need intervention and you have a student that's a lot farther below than other kids, we might decide that one-on-one is what that student needs. But typically I work in a small group, and that's up to 3.
And how long did these kids stay in the program, the intervention?
It depends on the kid. You know, there's kids that are in there for a year. There's some kids that are in it for kind of 1 cycle, which for us is usually 18 weeks, and then they get out. It kind of depends. I don't know if that's about.
Yeah, it also depends on the intervention itself. Different interventions that we use have different lengths of time to kind of complete the intervention. It ranges from like 6 to 24, not 6, I'm sorry, 12 to 24 weeks, depending on the program we're using. So we really have to look at the student factor, like where they are, what program they need, the length of the program, how they're doing, if they're growing in the program. There's a lot of factors that we consider when we're forming our groups.
how many different types of programs are there? What do you choose from in order to decide how to intervene?
So from reading, we look at all the different kind of components of reading. We have a program that we use that kind of is an overall encompassing literacy program that works on word work, comprehension, and what you would call phonics, decoding. If we have a student that needs specific help in any one of those three areas, we have individualized programs that focus on just phonics or just comprehension. So
Hmm?
data. When we look at the data, we really need to drill down to not just the numbers, but what do those, beyond those numbers, what indicates the need the student has in that subject area to help kind of guide our groups that we make and what programs we choose to use with our students.
For math, we have 2 programs, and again, it's based on assessment, kind of deciding which program to use. One is called AVMR, and it kind of breaks math into 5 different categories. So counting, number ID, structuring, things like that. So based on where students are on assessments, we can see where the needs or the gaps are. Sometimes it'll be touching all of those areas, sometimes just touching one. But AVMR is one program, and then a new one we have this year is called Do the Math.
So generally in a semester, how many kids do you see in reading?
Well, we're in the middle of conferences right now, and I figured out that I had 28 conferences between Tuesday night and tomorrow morning. So right now in the groups that I'm working with 28 students.
I would say that's comparable.
Okay,
And that's really just a heritage.
Yes, yes. It's usually between, I'd say, 2 to 6 students in a grade level that we're working with. And then you think, there's 5 grade levels, so somewhere in there.
I think this year, at least for heritage, you have 2 reading interventionists. So would you say that you're working with
Yes.
double the students?
True, yes.
It's
So,
just for you.
yes, just, that was 28 just for me. But thank you very much, since you hired a second one for me and I'm not struggling all by myself. We can do about double that.
great, thank you.
And likewise for Jamie, last year,
Definitely.
Jamie
Yeah.
was the only, and now we have Joanna 50%.
Yeah. It's making a huge difference.
Do you see any of what they've gone through the last couple years? Do you see anything that's, oh, wow, this is, like some kind of alarming?
I don't know if there's seen anything alarming. We have noticed, kind of like the data with STARS showed, that some of the scores are trending a bit lower than we're used to. We have, for example, in 2nd grade, we have some 2nd graders that are reading at a kindergarten level, and we haven't seen students that behind in the past. I think that's the main thing we're seeing, given the fact that we went through last year with the virtual and the pandemic. I'm not too surprised. I'm really curious and interested to see how our interventions can help those kids catch up, and if we're able to catch them up at a rate that will be useful for them.
I think for math, one thing we've noticed, just because if kids score below the 25th percentile, I give them an additional math screener. And I've noticed that a lot of kids need some more boosting up in their number sense. So, not just memorizing the facts, but to understand different strategies and are you flexible. So I think that's something that's more, not just for intervention students, but universally. But I know that's something that we're looking at in terms of curriculum.
Yeah, that's something that we've been talking about again with that tier 1. So have we noticed that, a few more kids than normal need some more work on number? We've talked a lot about how we can kind of start our guided reading, quickly and move kids through levels as soon as they're able to, show mastery. So that is something that we been talking a lot about is really addressing needs in tier 1, and then of course in addition to the tier 2 and tier
Could I ask a question?
3. Please.
It's just my hypothesis, so it's not science-based, it's just based upon what seems somewhat obvious. The big drops came just before and through the COVID situation. And, you know, that was a significant drop, especially, you know, mid-19 to early 20. Do we have the resources to address that, the number of kids that were probably affected by that? The system makes sense what we're doing, but are enough kids getting in to make up the loss that they may have had to bring them up faster, or are we inadequate with the staffing to do that?
Well, kind of as we were talking about, you know, there are some things now that we're focusing on for tier 1, because it might not be the case that it would just be an outlier now that would go to the interventionist. It might be the teacher would be looking at her whole class and saying, oh, they all kind of have this gap in phonics, I'm going to do some extra phonics lessons. So that's kind of what I've been working on with the instructional coaches, is how can we see what we need in tier 1? You know, we want to keep working on our grade level material, of course, but are there some little gaps that we want to fill as we're going along? So that's how we're addressing that.
Thank you.
Any other questions for K6 before we move to 7-12? All right, thank you, Pam and Jamie, for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes,
Thanks, guys.
thank you.
Thank you both.
Nice meeting you.
Nice to see you.
So for middle school and high school, what we have for information is going to look a little different from what you've seen for K6, just because the way our academic monitoring is structured is a little different. So you've seen slides like this before, because we instituted this type of reporting with you last year, but this is showing on the 4-week progress reports, which is the yellow, what percent of all scores on the 4-week progress reports were Fs. And you can see this in what is now a 6-year series. And you can see we're starting to track back to where we were pre-pandemic, not all the way. October 2019 was 5.3. Prior to that, we were around 4. Last year at this time, we're 10.1. So this is retraced in a positive direction, but we're not all the way back. So this is one piece. And if we could go to the next slide, Rebecca. This is our number of students with at least one F. And again, this is not going to be on their transcript. This is the 4-week progress report you get as a parent. 4 weeks comes up pretty quickly in the term. There's not a lot of information. And if a kid had a low quiz or a low test, that can have an outside weight, I should say now, versus the semester grade. You can see 22% of our students had at least one F on a progress report. October of 2019, pre-pandemic, 21.4. Last year at this time, 32%. So again, coming back, not all the way back, and actually October 2019 was elevated from what the preceding 3 years are. So the direction is positive. The level we'd like to see come down more. And if you could advance, Rebecca.
Before you do, when you
Okay.
say at least one,
Yes,
is it at any time during that progress period or at the point of when you looked at it?
so these are snapshots. You know, what happens the grades that show up on a transcript that are what we might call a permanent grade, if somebody asks for the high school transcript, a college, an employer, what they're going to see is the purple one, the semester one.
Right.
That's the final. But at 3 points during the semester, we take a snapshot and we put that in Infinite Campus. Parents get a progress report. That doesn't stick. It's a moment in time. I mean, I could have a B today. I could have a unit test tomorrow. I could ace that unit test and I might be up to an A- or an A the next day. But at the point we ran the progress reports, 22% of the kids had at least one F grade on their progress.
And the reason I bring it up from personal experience with our kids, it's happened where it's one particular class where they're not failing it, but they haven't completed the, not for anything that they did. It's just whatever this is. I
Is this
won't say
perhaps computer science?
it's not.
Oh, okay.
And so it shows up on there and I'm always curious, like, well, it's not really reflecting anything. And the teacher themselves, they say, you know, it doesn't matter. You just haven't done this portion yet, but it still shows up in there as an F. So it's like, it's a little weird.
It sounds like they're putting their assignments in too soon with a weight on it, and they should just pick it out or something.
It's just that it's in there as a default that way until it gets corrected. So that's where I was wondering, well, if that's the case, that would sort of make sense that there's a hard number that have Fs. If mine showed up as an F that way, when it truly wasn't reflective of the actual situation, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the challenges, particularly with the 4-week mark. It does come up quickly. And again, it's an arbitrary boundary when we ask people to submit. The reason we've done this historically is we would rather, and I admit, you know, as a parent, when you get this, the stress level may go up a little bit. We would rather over communicate to the downside than have a student off track early and not have the information to the parents they were aware of it. It's not a perfect science because Infinite Campus, if people plan ahead, they've got to, you know, take a lot of care to make sure that that assignment's in there, but it hasn't been scored yet. How does it calculate? But that's why we do what we do. You know, I know these are things that Brian Borowski and his team here, and I think there are things we look at in terms of training. Could we make it better? But at the 4-week mark, it's difficult to get it. But yeah, we certainly we understand that feedback from parents certainly that. This is the middle school picture. So middle school has again shown positive improvement relative to last year. Middle school is further away from snapping back to where they were pre-pandemic. Now I say that, and I have to note that Fs are much less common at the middle school to begin with. And I think the other thing here is, in part, this could be an academic measure, but behind the academics are students as whole children. And while I think most kids are doing really well being back, I think having interrupted interactions with peers, particularly in large group settings for a period of time, we have students that are still adjusting to that at all grade levels. But I think if you think about the shifts that kids go through socially and developmentally during early adolescence, I think these adjustments are occurring at all grade levels, but I feel as if they're a little more pronounced grades 6 through 9 right now. And I do think partly this is not representative of necessarily academic gaps, as some students who, again, the shift back to the full routine with everybody in class coming during the early adolescent years is is a bit of a stretch. And I think over time, things will kind of, come into, a little more center for all of our kids. But there's no question, percentage of Fs at 3% is still historically high. It's half what it was this time last year. That's good. But it's roughly double where it's been historically. And if you go to the next slide, Rebecca, the percent of kids with at least one F, again, at 13.8, we've shaved 10% off from the previous year. But again, it's still elevated over where this has been historically. So that renormalization process is not as advanced. I mean, it's happening, but it's not as advanced at the middle school as it is at the high school. I actually think while academics are probably part of it, I think there are other aspects in academics that are true academic skills that are at play here. The other piece of information we have, you could move down, Rebecca. We don't have the kind of great historical data that Amy was able to share with the STAR at the elementary, because for the last few years we've been using the Aspire. And the Aspire is a very different instrument. ACT retired the Aspire for district use effective in June. So if you remember back to your summer meetings, we talked about the iReady adoption. So iReady is new to us this year, and it's enough of a different assessment from Aspire that even though we did calculate percentages, we aren't doing the historical trend here. If you feel for the next board meeting would like to see the preceding years of Aspire and then this year's iReady to have a multi-year series and just put a disclaimer in there, assessment change, we could certainly go ahead and do that. But it's not here right now. So what you're seeing here is the reading and math for 7th grade and 8th grade, and really pretty similar to each other. So I guess, that would be a question I would have for you. I was reluctant to do the multi-year comparison, but if you feel as a committee would be helpful, we could extend this out for the full board report.
I think it would. I don't, understanding that they're different, but I think it would probably be helpful.
Okay. Do that.
That's my.
I don't have any trouble with this, but I don't have any trouble with extending it either, so. Mark, what do you think?
Mark's on mute.
I'd like the board to hear a summarization of this. I think we should try to limit it to no more than 15 minutes, maybe 20 tops. And if we could hit the high points, not the entire PowerPoint. So that would be my recommendation.
Okay. Thank you, Mark.
Can I ask a question, being new to this? I've never heard of iReady before. And I've just learned what forward is this year. Has anyone ever used or discussed something called map testing, and how would that relate to this?
So MAP is a very similar assessment to iReady is an adapt. So Amy was speaking to STAR being adapt. iReady is an adaptive assessment. We had used measures of academic progress from 2003 to around 2013 or 2014. So we've used MAP before in the system, yes.
So it was MAP, and then you progressed into iReady.
We progressed into, so our assessment history is we use MAP. With the Common Core changes, the MAP batteries became longer to administer. Teacher feedback was we would like more streamlined assessments. So we moved to STAR K6, ACT Aspire 7-8. And then when the Aspire retired this last year, we brought in iReady.
You said it's adaptive, so meaning if an 8th grader is performing at the 10th grade, it will allow them to progress it.
It will give them items above the 8th grade level of grade, yes.
Wait, can you repeat that?
So this test does scale the item rigor into high school, yes.
Okay.
If we could move on. So at the middle school and high school, our intervention model is different. So I'm going to describe it in tiers here. But the way that tier 2 and tier 3 look at the middle school and high school are very different from what Pam and Jamie provide. So the primary vehicles at these schools, instead of the IE block, win time is twice a week. At the middle school, contact time is essentially 4 times a week. At the high school, home advisories on Monday, contact time is Tuesday through Friday. In addition to that, in the schools, we do workshop interventions. Very few students outside of special education at the middle school and high school get one-to-one intervention, whereas our most intensive students in the lower grades might. It's partly because by the time you get to the secondary level, you typically are not targeting a very discrete skill where you can say, here's this very well-defined math skill, or here's this very well-defined decoding skill. The academic aspects of working on here are more general, and so the supports are not as targeted. I mean, certainly if a student is having difficulty with text comprehension or modeling in mathematics, the workshop will focus on it, but it's not as discrete as what you see in the lower grades. So what we have instead are these workshop classes. And in the workshop classes, the interventionist would be working with small groups, 4 students, 8 students, sometimes 12 students at the high school. And again, it's in addition to what they'd be getting in the regular classes, but it's not as narrowly focused as it is with younger students who developmentally they're working on some very discrete skills. To the extent there is a tier 3, sometimes you will have students in the middle school that will get a more specific targeted intervention. This would be a very low achieving student who we might be considering, would they qualify for special education services? That's a scenario where you might see this. And then at the high school, we have some at the middle school, but more at the high school, we have alternative education programs that give students support in addition to the workshop supports. And in kind of the last scenario, there's a branch in the alternative education service delivery model where they're actually looking at a competency-based program or a GEDO-based program instead of actually completing their credits the same way that most students would to earn a diploma. We'll be bringing more information on Ed to you in January, so you can get a really deep dive on what that looks like, because it's been several years since we brought information about kind of the full scope of all Ed to this committee. Support staff at the middle school and high school. As a board, you've made investments in this area this year as well. The main investment is Ann Severson is on a 50% contract, which means she's teaching 3 sections of reading, writing workshop. And what that has allowed us to do is take Rebecca Murray, who's a reading interventionist, and instead of spreading her over schools, she's 100% at the middle school now. And then Ann is doing our high school reading writing workshops. Christy Wright is our math interventionist at the middle school. At the high school, we don't have standalone math interventionists. Instead, members of the math department have workshop sections. We have workshops for all of our, so stepping back, to diploma, you need 3 credits in mathematics. While most of our students take geometry as 9th graders, students who may be at a different developmental level of math, maybe taking algebra as 9th graders. So for algebra, geometry, and advanced algebra, we run 2 sections each of workshop, and these are courses that students take in lieu of a study hall. They can earn math credit for these. They are paired to algebra, so it's guided support on the concepts that are being taught in the class. If there are certain procedural skills that students could use additional practice, that can be part of the math workshop as well.
Do they get math credit for their algebra and math credit for their workshop?
Yes, they're a quarter credit per semester. So if I was a ninth grade student and I was taking algebra with workshop, I would be getting, over the course of the year, a credit and a half in mathematics. And so what I would say here is, I think I'll anticipate the question that you asked, Amy, do we have enough support? And I think at this stage, we have more support. I think we're seeing the grades move in a positive direction, but not all the way back. I think we're still, in kind of an assessment mode. How much of this is due, the remainder ground would like to see made up to get us to where we would be maybe in 2018, 2019. How much of that is truly due to academic skill deficits, and how much of that may be more in the behavioral area, but that's affecting persistence with challenging topics, affecting homework completion, pieces like that. And I think it's a little early for us to have a definitive look. So again, I would say the picture is positive, but it's not completely sunny. We're making a lot of headway over where we were last year. We're not quite back to where we'd like to be, particularly at the middle school level. And I'll open it up.
The kids that they need 3 credits of math to graduate, right?
Yes.
So if you're having a challenge, you could get by with algebra, geometry, and the 2 workshops.
Yes, and that's by design.
Okay.
We would encourage students, particularly if they're going on to higher education, to take mathematics every year until graduation. But our diploma minimum is 3. And yes, you could get there if you were taking in your 9th and 10th grade year by taking a math course with its associated workshop. Now, you can't, as a student, choose to take workshop. We recommend that a student take workshop, and that's based on looking at their academic performance in the math class, because these workshop sections are smaller. At any given point in time, we probably have between 25 and 35 students, give or take, between the 2 sections in each workshop. This is an additional level of support, and we're also sensitive to the fact that when a student's in workshop, they're not in the study hall.
Yeah.
And so they might be losing some time there that they could use for their other subjects. So we only implement the workshop for the students we think most need it for their mathematical success.
And there is no other level of math at the high school for graduation other than algebra, geometry.
So
I'm thinking more of the kids who are struggling with math. There's nothing less strenuous than that kind of math.
So there's no course in the high school below algebra, unless you are in a heavily modified special education program.
Yes, special ed. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, we don't have,
Business math.
we
practical
don't
math.
have business math except maybe as a 1 or 2 student a year kind of thing, in unique situations.
Tim, do we have either a goal or a policy that would dictate all students do graduate with algebra at least?
So unless you have an IEP, you're going to have algebra to graduate. And in fact, you're going to have at least geometry to graduate.
The reason I asked, when we first started doing the PLCs at the workshops, that was one of the minimum expectations for success post high school was passing algebra. And it was really strongly suggested there that every student needs that, however we can provide it for them.
Yeah, so in our model, roughly 80% of our students take algebra, geometry, and in some cases, if they're double accelerated, advanced algebra as 8th grade students. Now, students that are a low pass in 8th grade algebra, those would be the students that would take algebra again as 9th graders. It's an aligned course, but the materials are a little different. They're getting it in a block instead of a 42-minute period. But yes, all of our, and the vast majority of our students, and I'd have to kind of go back and look, but a very, very high percentage of our students complete advanced algebra as well. But yes, unless you have an IEP, and most of our students, I would add, with IEPs are in the regular mathematics. But you will be completing actually geometry.
So this isn't one that they can, I mean, you can't take that as a credit. Do any of the ones where this is recommended for, if they say, I'm not doing it, is that an option? Do you run into that or?
So in general, we've had parents try on very limited occasions to advocate for their child not taking algebra workshop. Our policy has been, if you're recommended in a math workshop, you'll need to take it because we think it's important for your success. So the answer is yes. Okay, good. Very good. So I want to, anything else, Mark, on the academic progress and supports part of the agenda?
I think we can move on to items for future meetings.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So I want to kind of forecast what's coming up. Your next meeting's on November 4th, and as part of the November 4th meeting, we are going to bring in some information, a little bit of parallel on some of our student behavior and social emotional learning. We also will have our big presentation on our spring assessments, state assessments, and AP tests. And actually, that's been prepared and it will actually be presented on the 4th by Abby Lewis, who's joined us. Abby is a Sun Prairie teacher who's doing her practicum in ed leadership at the UW. She's working with us on our CNI practicum, so she will be doing the driving on that part of the agenda. Our state assessment results, which we've had since the summer, are going to be released publicly by DPI on Wednesday, the 20th next week. So I'm assuming the state.
What's the date of that, Tim?
Wednesday, the 20th, Mark. So
Thank
I would
you.
expect on the 20th, you're going to see it in the paper. We'll bring in the full report with our stuff to your next curriculum committee meeting on November 4th. And then we'll bring it into the full board for the November 8th meeting for the full board. So that's when we're going to see what our state assessments were, and we're going to also see where everybody else's state assessment results were. We
Tim?
also have new course proposals, and so the November 4th agenda is going to be pretty high traffic. Yes, Mark?
As a board member, I think we really need to have a couple other things brought to us. I was hoping November, but with the amount of things we're going to hear, maybe one in November, one in December. So the first one, curriculum proposals are coming in. Will that include updates on current curriculum that have been modified?
So give me an example of what would be an area we'd like.
Okay, this is really in relationship to being able to respond to the public regarding what we are doing in-house for DEI curriculum updating, not necessarily creating new, but I mean, that would include new and revision to curriculums. We have nothing on that, and people have been asking about that for a long time. Critical of what they think we're doing, and as a board member, I don't know what we're doing. So I think that would be something very helpful for us to hear. The other update would be on the reporting system for students, self-reporting of needs based upon offensive behavior or just what they view as a system breakdown. And to hear that again is a piece that our public keeps asking us about, but we have no answers to give them. So at least it would be helpful to get this to the curriculum and then to the board before the year's out, in my estimation.
So what we could do is, we have the November 4th meeting that will lead into the regular November meeting.
Right.
We do need to have a meeting sometime later in November or at the latest early December prior to the December full board meeting.
Yep.
And I could see us bringing in the reporting tool, those curricular topics you referenced, as well as our state report cards. The state accountability report cards are going to be released on November 16th. So anytime on the 16th or afterwards, we could have that meeting and we could address all three at that time.
Perfect. Perfect.
So, I mean, I think, you know, we could talk about, we could even talk about dates for that meeting today, for the three of you, and kind of get that teed up. And then when we set meetings at the board, at the board's November meeting, we would actually already have that in our calendars and just formalize it then. I don't know if there's an interest in doing that. Get it on the books.
Well, my calendar's pretty open after that board meeting, those 2 weeks after the, so.
And how does your schedule look in mid to late November? It's busy that time of year.
Fine, whatever.
Okay, so, maybe I don't know how the 18th looks for your calendar. So, Mark, do you have anything that would be a conflict for the afternoon of Thursday, November 18th? You're on
As I mean, no conflict at all.
Okay, so why don't we plan on the 18th? What will happen is the report cards will be released sometime early in all likelihood on the 16th. So we'll have everything ready to go in board book. Once we get our state report cards released early morning on the 16th, we'll drop those into the board book and we'll publish the meeting at that time. But I might want to get you the other information, at least, we might get you the reporting tool in advance. You don't get everything at the last moment.
There is a WTA meeting now, but that doesn't involve anyone in this committee or either of the two of you. But if you wanted Mr. Gutenberg at that meeting, he would not be available.
I mean, we could look at the next week, but the next week is leading into Thanksgiving break. And when we come out of Thanksgiving break, we'll be right into December. I'm flexible.
Or you could have an earlier meeting if you guys have flexible schedules. Like maybe a 3 o'clock or 2:30.
I'm good with that.
I can make it early.
Going earlier, like 2:30.
2:30 is fine.
What time?
2:30?
Sure. And then do we have one on the 4th?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would just miss that.
Okay.
I would
That
just
works.
miss that. Okay, 2:30 on the 18th.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? If people come in and propose in this November meeting for new suggested new classes, like how soon would they be implemented in a school?
So in general, the courses we're looking at will have come through an internal process at the high school and would come onto the books, budget and staff permitting, which this year is an asterisk because of the state budget, for fall of 2022, so the next year,
What, 23?
22. Next academic year, fall of 22.
Oh,
The
starting,
22,
okay,
23
got it.
school year.
And sorry, I forgot my other question. Oh, do you ever use, and some people might cringe when I ask this, do you ever use virtual offerings? If a student needs a specific class and it's not cost, it's just cost prohibitive to offer a whole classroom. Would you ever allow a child to take it, remotely and then get credit for it within the school?
The answer to that is generally yes.
Generally, yes, okay.
So I think you face to be Tracy. I would love when we're done to set up a time for us to, well, what grades are your kids in?
9 and 11.
So I would love to set up a time with you, either in person, Zoom, whatever works for you. We'll do a deep dive into all of your questions and suggestions.
I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to distract.
No, that's totally good, totally good. So. Anything else for future meetings, Mark?
Not from my end. Anybody else in the committee?
I'm good.
All right, then it seems like we're ready to adjourn. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great.
Nice job, everybody.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
That's,